Enlightened Triple Constraints. One of them is expectations. Of course, it rests on the foundation that is built by the nature, the strength, and the levels of trust in your relationships with your stakeholders, both internal to the team as well as external to the team. Why expectations? You know, after all these years, I've come to a rather startling and probably incredibly obvious truth about expectations. You can't meet expectations you don't even know people have of you. I'm sure at least one person's saying, really? She had to come to that understanding. Whew. Ugh, poor Kimi. It's been a long day. I don't think it was something that hit me out of the blue. It was more a level of clarity about why your relationships and your levels of trust are so important. Because without those really strong relationships and a nice high level of trust, people are not always willing to be forthcoming with what their expectations are. But even more important, sometimes they don't actually know how to articulate what some of their expectations are. And with a strong relationship with your stakeholders, you can have those kinds of conversations that give you a much broader scope of what their expectations are for the project, for the deliverable, for the objective. But when the relationship is kind of just beginning, we haven't really built a very strong level of trust yet, well, you're going to have to take them an awful lot at their word. This is not to say that I'm implying that they might be lying. They're not. Well, okay, sometimes everybody's got a rotten apple, etc. But for the most part, your stakeholders want to be candid with you in part because you're the one who's going to help them achieve their strategic objectives. The thing is, as a project leader, you know darn well that there may be expectations that don't get aired immediately or are not even realized yet. Sometimes people think of certain expectations as a given. Doesn't everybody? Fill in the blank. No. Most of the time, not everybody does it that way, understands this process, or follows that procedure, or, well, any number of things. People have different ways of working, even within a single organization. Ah, come on, if you've ever transferred from one department to another, you know what I'm talking about. So expectations can be an accidental tripping hazard. You don't even know it's there until you stub your toe on it and lose your balance a little bit. But you see, you want to be the person who stubs their toe and loses their balance a little bit because then you can do something about the expectation that's not getting met so that your team doesn't have to. And that obstacle, well, you removed it because ongoing, candid discussions about what people are looking for, what people expect, can help you remove any obstacles that might stop your team from being able to deliver. And isn't that, to a great extent, what project leadership is all about? Project management is always going to be important because there are processes and steps and procedures that we all have to follow. There are guidelines and policies. And in many, many cases, plain good old-fashioned best practices. Okay, sometimes they're called industry benchmarks. Sometimes they're called the voice of experience, the wisdom of experience, or things I've learned that I would really like to have you not have to get your own scar tissue on. All of that is what tells us that sometimes the most important expectation that we're going to have to meet is one that they haven't quite formulated in their own minds yet, or that they may take for granted as, part of that But everybody does fill in the blank that way. Hmm. I'm reminded of going to dinner for the first time at a friend's house. Most of my friends had family dynamics that were very similar to my own. Slightly quiet conversations, but at a fairly moderate volume level. This friend? Oh my God. The conversations were loud and voracious, and the comments were flying back and forth in a very, very strongly held tone of voice. And by the time I left, I asked her, I said, are they going to make up? She said, make up. I said, well, we spent the entire dinner and dessert and coffee arguing and yelling at each other. And she said, oh, yeah, that's just the way we talk. Because if you have a stand on something, you should be loud. You should care about it. You should be passionate and voracious. And I said, yeah, and loud. She said, yeah, that's just the way we do it. Isn't that the way your family discusses things? I started laughing because, you see, she was coming over to my house the next evening for dinner. And I thought now might be a good time to level that expectation. I said, well, it's a little different in my family. This is going to be a little bit interesting for you, but I guarantee you that it's going to be a little bit quieter. Not everybody discusses things the same way. Not everybody does projects the same way. And not everybody goes through the steps to get to their objective and achieve it in quite the same way. So, part of your job as a project leader is to get those things articulated so that you and your team can build in everything that you need to be able to meet those expectations. It's not always easy. It's not always fun. Think of it this way, though. If you have ever been working on a project and thought to yourself, why are we doing this? Who are we doing this for? Well, there you go. Remember, your team is just as interested in knowing who the key stakeholders are as your key stakeholders might be interested in knowing who a few key players on your team might be. So keep that information flowing. Make sure that you do reasonably decent boundary management. You know, some information has to be managed in terms of when it gets released and how it gets released. We're not trying to sacrifice transparency. We're just trying to make sure that timing and the impact is also respected. So boundary management can be very important, particularly when you're being transparent with your team about who the stakeholders are, what they're looking for from you and your team, and what they hope to achieve with the tool that you're going to provide to them at the end of this project. So make sure that you know, what is it they expect in terms of the product deliverable? What is it that they expect in terms of how it will perform in order to meet their objectives? How well does your team understand all of those expectations and how they impact each and every one of your team members on a day-to-day basis? 3 suggestions that can help you manage the expectations of your incredibly important stakeholders just a tiny bit better. But as they become habits, you'd be surprised at the incremental difference it can make in how you and your teams are able to achieve for your key stakeholders. I'm KimiKSP. Positive action, easily done, no okay, sometimes more easily than others, that you can put into action quickly. That's really the hallmark of what we're trying to offer here. So like, comment, or subscribe. We'd love to have you continue to visit with us. And of course, I'm always delighted to hear from people about what they thought, what they liked, what they thought was kind of weird or hokey. Send me those comments too, please. My contact information is at the end of this video lesson. This video has been brought to you by Leadership Driven Project Management Academy, and we were delighted to have you join us for it.